healthcare business podcast from the Coker Group that focuses on solutions to help healthcare organizations effectively navigate the changing healthcare industry landscape.
And we're back with another episode of Coffee with Coker. We thank you for listening. My name is Mark Reibolt, and I'm the host of the podcast. And today's episode, we're talking with Andy Sobczyk and Jeffery Daigrepont, both of whom are consultants here at Coker. And we're talking about digital transformation. This is one of those discussions that it's a very broad topic, at least from the title, but Andy and Jeffrey get into a number of different things that we're seeing throughout the healthcare marketplace as it relates to, or that falls under that broad category, if you will, of digital transformation. Specifically, we talk about things like AI and the growing role that AI is playing in healthcare, which is one of those areas that, there's still a little bit of trepidation, even some concern perhaps, but definitely a lot of questions as to what does AI look like in the healthcare delivery process, or what could it potentially look like? And there is just a lot there. But one of the things I was surprised is how much AI is already involved in healthcare services here in the US and globally. And so we look at a little bit of those types of things, some of those examples. And then really one of the main things I think that's interesting here is in the discussion, Jeffrey and Andy talk about ways that this isn't just some kind of big picture, theoretical or academic oriented topic where it's kind of very unrealistic or way far down the road, but it's really making it much more applicable. So if you're an executive in a hospital or a health system or a medical group, whatever the size or scale or location, what's happening as far as digital transformation is very relevant to you and your organization today. And there's a lot you can be thinking about and starting to do as far as preparing for digital transformation and the benefits of that for your organization today, planning for the future. And I think that's really what we wanted to get across here is making this meaningful for you, our audience, making it of value for your organizations. So I hope you enjoy this. There'll definitely be more to come on the topic of digital transformation, AI, and data and analytics, privacy and healthcare, all those types of themes that came up in this discussion. A lot of it is stuff that we are doing actively today with clients. So it is very pertinent to today's world and is only going to become more so in the future. So we hope you enjoyed this and stay tuned for more content on this topic and related topics coming out in the future. If you would like to listen to more of the Coffee with Coker episodes, you can find all of those episodes at coffeewithcoker.com. And you can follow us on social media, Twitter and LinkedIn. You can also find all of our information at cokergroup.com, as well as information on Jeffrey, Andy, myself, others who join us as guests on the podcast. And we hope you enjoy this conversation with Andy and Jeffrey. All right. Well, welcome back for another episode, and welcome back, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Mark.
And then welcome, I guess, first time on the podcast is Andy Sobczyk. So welcome, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
Today, as we mentioned in the intro, we're talking about digital transformation in healthcare. And so, of course, that's a very broad title or topic, and there's a lot to it. And what we want to do is unpack that a little bit. And Andy, I know you've thought about this a good bit. You've thought about it in terms of there's a lot to unpack. And there are a lot of different things that come to people's minds when they hear the term or buzzwords around digital transformation. But I think what's helpful about, and what we want to do is start breaking it down a little bit and trying to make it practical. So if you're a healthcare executive out there, you're thinking about what does digital transformation mean for me? And most importantly, how does it help my organization? That's what we want to ultimately get at. But I guess as we're thinking about that and ultimately trying to get to that destination, digital transformation has become this kind of buzzword. Maybe just start with, what does it even mean? And what are we talking about when we say digital transformation?
Yeah, so I can kick that off. And I'll put my disclaimer in. I'm not a technology expert. I come from operations, and my role at the firm is related to operations and physician enterprise. But I've done a lot of research recently. And one of the things I do internally here is a market awareness update. And I read a lot of articles. And you see this phrase everywhere. As a consultant, it sounds like a really cool buzzword. We can probably put it in some PowerPoints.
Sure.
And you see it at conferences. But I really, kind of wanted to learn more and understand it. And in doing some research, I kind of tried to simplify the definition for myself. And I'm thinking digital transformation really means combining new advances in technology, and there are a lot of them, but combining those with cultural and organizational change management to fundamentally alter the way somebody or an organization does business. And I think the cultural and organizational change piece of that is really important because it's not just implementing a new IT platform is going to solve all your problems. It is top down, needs to change the entire organization, and everybody needs to be on board with it. And I think that's one of the cool aspects of this is that you sift through the noise that's out there, all the articles, all the new companies being launched, and then you take it to a CEO and he has to strategize, he or she has to strategize. What does it mean for the organization? How can they leverage the data, the platforms they have to then alter how they deliver care? In our example in healthcare. And I'm thinking now is a really great time to be interested in this. As a former operations executive, I found that it was always really helpful to understand the technology that was in place in terms of improving, your team and your role. So I think anybody that's out there that is interested in this at all, having a basic understanding will really help in the future, because I think this is something that's going to be prevalent everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I think there are a lot of things out there that lead us to believe that. You see that just last year, healthcare invested about $12 billion in digital health. That was according to Becker's. That's only going to grow. And organizations everywhere are interested in this. There was a 2017 study on artificial intelligence among global executives. It was done by MIT and BCG Consulting. They interviewed over 3,000 executives, and almost all of them, like quarters of them, believe that AI would enable their companies to move into new businesses. 85% said that AI would allow their company to gain a competitive advantage, but only about 20% of them had actually done something. 20% had actually incorporated it. So that gap between expectation and excitement and then actually execution is still pretty large. And I think now is a great time to get informed and start to think through how you can deploy some of these technologies. So I'm glad we have a technology expert here.
I was just going to comment on Mark's question, mm-hmm. which is, what does it mean? What does digital transformation mean? And what's interesting is if we went back 10 years ago, you would have probably defined that as adopting electronic health records, exactly. Right? I mean, that's, and then, you look back. And so sometimes you can kind of predict the future based on what you've seen from the past. And I think there's sort of two sides to that. One is, how much did we evolve as a result of adopting electronic health records? Some will argue not very much. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Well, if you look at EHRs today, most of those are just silos of data. Now the next generation of digital transformation is going to be, how do we monetize that data? In fact, there was a very interesting documentary on Netflix called The Great Hack. And apparently any one of us at any given time has over 5,000 data elements being tracked on us. Everything from our politics. That's right. And now companies are looking to leverage that. I'll give you a great example. Health systems spend millions of dollars a year just deploying large numbers of people to go collect money from individuals. Sure. And you don't know, based on a balance, if this is a collectible balance or one that's bad debt or not going to collect it. There's a company called LexisNexis that can tell us with high precision the propensity for any one of us to pay. Will we pay in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? They can identify those individuals with such a high degree of precision that it can tell the organization that you only need to focus on this 10% of your patients who haven't paid. I mean, where today they spend hundreds of thousands, not millions, in salary. So the logic there is, if I knew who is most at risk, I could focus my efforts and attention and resources and cost on that.
Instead of trying to cast such a wide net.
Yeah. So we're starting to see people look for ways to kind of monitor. That's just one example of an operational advantage, taking advantage of the data that's out there.
Well, I think that's perfect. We're going to dive in a little bit more to the AI thing, which is something that we're starting to do more in and see more of. But, I think, Andy, one of the points you made, I think, in just kind of breaking digital transformation down as far as defining it, and you even pointed this out, the things that jumped out to me first were the cultural and organizational change piece. And I mean, Jeffrey, you guys on the Coker Health IT consulting side, have seen this for many years. You even said 10 years ago, talking about digital transformation and adopting and implementing EHRs, the technology, it's not so much about innovation in the technology itself, right? I mean, the technology in many ways, particularly when we're talking about EHRs, those types of things, kind of is what it is. I think now what we're really talking about, though, as far as digital transformation, and this goes to your point, Jeffrey, it's about the data and the analytics that can come from that and how that can be monetized, not selling of data, but how you can leverage and utilize that data to benefit the organization. And I think that's where you get down to, there are a lot of different things. I think the LexisNexis example is great. It's very telling as far as let's be smarter in how we deploy some of these things and allow the technologies just to allow us to work smarter and not harder.
I've even heard some people describe data as being the new currency. If you think about it that way.
The new oil.
Yeah.
That's what that documentary says.
Yeah. And I think the potential is endless. And as we get into the AI part of our discussion, I have some really cool examples of what's occurring out there.
Yeah, I'd like to dive into that. I mean, when I hear AI, I think
robots.
Right? Yeah, right. Exactly. I think this, I guess, the closest thing to what I've seen in reality and not just movies is Tesla, that type of thing. But I mean, what are we talking about, though, when we talk about AI, and specifically in healthcare, I guess? What are some of the things you've observed thus far?
Yeah, so AI is kind of the global definition for sort of two types. One, which is really the more advanced, super cool stuff, is the deep learning. That's where the technology can evolve itself. More of the general AI that we see today uses algorithms to base statistical outcomes, and based on over patterns and periods of time, it can get it better. So it sort of uses the traditional if and do what. So a great easy example of that is you probably are not aware that virtually 60 to 70% of all your calls going into major companies like American Express, AT&T, those calls are handled by chatbots for the most part. And depending on what you say will drive the interaction with that chatbot. So it's sort of if and do what algorithm type technology. Not that advanced, but it is a form of AI. One thing that our healthcare providers struggle with is pain management, right? We have an addiction problem. We have an opioid crisis. Lots of people are dying from it. Well, now there's AI that can actually detect stress in your voice and your pain tolerance and can identify whether or not that person is really a drug seeker or this is an individual really in trouble. Suicide hotlines, for example, are picking up this technology because it can tell you if there's truly a crisis based on the voice sound waves that it's picking up. And so, that's sort of the next level of AI. Where doctors get very uncomfortable is when does AI cross the line and start treating their patients?
Yeah,
right?
That's what I found.
And there are some examples of that where it's occurring mostly on the medical device side. And then what's probably not good for our vendors is that if you cross the line into that, then now you're a medical device. Sure. And you need to go through the FDA process and whatnot. So to what extent, like the Alexis product, for example, there are vendors experimenting with those listening devices in the exam room that's overhearing the conversation. Great example, doctor's about to order a procedure that the patient cannot be on any blood thinner. They could bleed out. Well, again, if it's an Amazon listening device, it might know that patient already ordered some fish oil that the patient doesn't realize is a blood thinner. Yeah. That would be very important to share with your provider so you don't bleed out. So things like that where it can intervene in the care and provide better care. Consent, do we let the patient know? I mean, obviously you should. Do people get creeped out by that? Third-party devices listening, what's the privacy that goes along with it? When I do my lectures, I like to always start off with kind of a thought-provoking question. So I always ask the question about facial recognition. Probably more places than you realize it. But and the question is, how does it make you feel that if you walked into a business, they already know if you're a big tipper, a big spender, they know your political affiliations? With that, would you be comfortable with that? And the vast majority of people say, I am not comfortable with that. I don't like it. Then I'll ask a follow-up question. What if that same facial recognition recognize a terrorist on the top 100 most wanted list that was maybe carrying a backpack of explosives and could warn everybody? Are you comfortable with that? Then everybody says, absolutely, we should use it for that reason. So there's those trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
You have to kind of accept that if you want the benefit, you might have to give up a little privacy or information about yourself. It's like I tell people all the time, if you want to know where the nearest Starbucks is, you have to tell them your location. That's your trade-off. So
I've heard that as far as the negative response to the general idea of AI in healthcare from the clinical perspective is, hey, are we just going to allow computers basically to start treating patients?
Right.
Well, no, obviously that's not the point. By the same token, there, like in your example, there are a lot of ways that it can be additive to the care process. And I think that's the objective we're going after. But where, in terms of drawing that line, because then I start to think about things like HIPAA and privacy.
Right.
Obviously, there's a lot of compliance matters there, and there's obviously the technological element to this, the infrastructure, the data, the processing, those types of things. But then there's the change in the way things are done, and I think that is again, it goes back, Andy, to the cultural and organizational change, but the process, and we've seen this in telemedicine, right? We've seen it where clinicians can be very reluctant to give up that face-to-face interaction. What we've seen most recently, even just within the last less than a year, is many of them come around because one of the things they were most reluctant about was first of all, that face-to-face interaction was required for them to ultimately bill for it. So there was a financial component to it, even if there wasn't a clinical quality concern there. And then the other element, so now they can get paid for these encounters under telemedicine type environment, and just the level of technology, whether it's communications, whether it's the data there, whether it's just the way technology solutions have allowed us to interact remotely, has alleviated a lot of those concerns where, the face-to-face isn't always necessary. And if they can do that, they can see their patients, they can provide quality of care, and they can bill for those things. Okay, now we're talking. Is that going to be, is it going to be a similar progression, do you see, with AI, or are we kind of talking a whole new stratosphere of things going on?
Yeah, I think you mentioned when you first started talking about AI, Jeffrey, how there's concern about AI is going to take a job, or it's going to take over for a physician or whatever role it is. I think it's important for anybody looking into AI to understand that, the real opportunity is the, collaboration between the algorithms, the technology, and then people and, the users, because as I understand it, there's limitations to AI in terms of, how these algorithms learn. They require individuals and people to give feedback, to teach and improve the accuracy. Because at the end of the day, it's prediction. You're taking what information you have and then producing information you don't have.
And I don't disagree with that, but I will say I do think there are some unintentional consequences for our lower skilled, low income population.
Yeah.
The vast majority of AI that we see today is truly eliminating those repetitive tasks that tend to find. So there is some ethical discussions around income equality, who benefits from it. Let's even take the case of a medical device. I really don't see this replacing what you have to do with your hand as a surgeon, and some of that personal touch that goes into just compassion of being a caregiver. That's part of healthcare. I don't even know as a consumers, we feel very comfortable with just being treated by a machine. Mm-hmm. But the question then becomes, who's responsible then? Is it the developer? What happens when the machine learns and evolves? Who gets the IP? What happens when the AI goes rogue? And that has happened before. One concern is AI cures cancer, but does it by killing off all the humans. That's one way to do it. And there's been, it's Microsoft is, I forgot but it went really dark and started going off on racist rants, and they had to pull it. And then the other big concern that people have when it comes to treating individuals is what happens when the developer of the AI builds in their own bias.
Yeah.
So an example of that is in the sentencing, the judicial systems, judges now are using AI to punish criminals based on the AI's predictability of if they'll be repeat criminals. And there was one in particular that they discovered there was some bias built into it. And so
decisions on bail,
on bail and things like that. And in particular, what was really weird is, for whatever reason, if you were born in October, you had a higher rate of being a repeat offender. no logic to it. It just happened to be that that's what the data. So it was actually sentencing stronger sentences to people that were born in the month of October for some random reason.
My birthday's in October, so I would have been really in a bad position.
Yeah, throw you under this.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the potential, just in reading up on this and kind of applying it to my previous experience in operations, I think the cost savings, for healthcare organizations, that the potential there is tremendous. I mean, I think, you hear these debates about cost in healthcare, and I think the insurers,
right,
drug companies get a lot of the, they get a lot of attention there, but, it's not cheap for health systems to deliver healthcare either.
Right.
And I think in terms of, the potential for AI to, automate and potentially, make some of these tasks that are manual, require a lot of, individuals doing very simplistic but repetitive duplicate tasks, they can make that so much cheaper. It's the technology, the way it's advancing, it's becoming so inexpensive to do things. Like cloud computing is becoming so much cheaper, than it was just 5 years ago. And so I think if you can make the cost of that prediction or those simple tasks like, a pre-certification or scheduling a patient, that could be better for patients, could be better for everybody. Allows people to scale up.
Yeah, and you think about it, and we already have proven that costs are not completely detached from quality, or they're not mutually exclusive. And so when you talk about cost savings, that's not just a financial thing. That could potentially be clinical quality connection too. I mean, you think about just keeping people out of the hospital. That's everybody knows that's a big goal, obviously now, right? And using data, using analytics, using AI potentially to, help map that patient's care and coordinate that care so that, hey, we can, very specifically reduce the chance that they're going to be readmitted. Well, that's good for the patient. That's good for the organization. That's good for the payer. I mean, that's a three-legged stool benefit.
And one thing that will drive this, whether the doctors want to embrace it or not, is we genuinely have a capacity problem and an access problem.
Sure.
There are parts of the country that there's literally no healthcare within hundreds, if not thousands of miles. If you go in some of these remote areas, the only access that they might have, if they're lucky, would be a telemedicine physician.
Yeah.
And then if you could deliver more automation into these parts, it would be one way to bend that cost curve, because this same population tends to have delayed care, which we all know gets a lot more expensive. So there's a great example of whether or not the market forces are going to just drive it sheerly on demand and capacity challenges, not so much doctors' willingness to embrace it.
I think, can we circle back to the data portion? Because I think, I'm just somebody that's on the outside learning about AI. I don't know that I have my head wrapped around how data interacts with the algorithms, because it requires terabytes and terabytes of data to feed these algorithms. Am I just feeding it, a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and it's learning, or how does
that's actually a really good question. When we talk about how do you start preparing an organization for AI, I would tell people don't even attempt it unless you have a good handle on your data, and specifically the cleansing of your data. Is it even good quality data? Because AI relies so exclusively on information. And the other challenge that's a big misconception, there's not a single repository out there that has all the information. So you have to rely on a lot of interoperability. And candidly, that's probably going to be the foreseeable barriers for it. I think they'll overcome it. There's doing some standards around this FHIR interoperability. They're trying to, a part of meaningful use that vendors have to comply with. There's compliance and compatibility standards that they're mandating. So the goal is to try to get more standardization of the data. But that's a key. If you don't have good, strong quality data, then you'll struggle with any of this technology.
Yeah, I mean, that is the backbone of all of this. Right. I mean, even extrapolating from just AI. I mean, just even going back to the EHR discussion.
Right. And on a real basic level, if you just take it down to where does data start? Let's go to patient registration. Mm-hmm. I have a really strange last name. So what's the odds that my last name is spelled the same way each and every time I go to a location of care? So now we're trying to treat me through some aggregating of the data. You're going to have to know that you have the right patient. So we need many different identifiers that can give me a good indication that they do indeed have the right patient. Otherwise, you could hurt somebody. Yeah. I mean, that's the concern.
Or at the very least, you're going to have disparate data sets out there
Right.
under those different spellings of what the system may perceive as just a different name. So
Absolutely.
just for organization.
Yeah.
What should somebody look for then if they're, trying to identify if their data is usable or if it's, clean, as
Right,
you mentioned?
Yeah, I think that the first key is if you have if you're getting a lot of return mail, that's a bad sign. You guys have bad addresses or a lot of deduping denials where the claims are being rejected as a result of duplications. I will tell you that sometimes it's not a technology problem. It is just sloppiness at the front desk. Just input. They just don't have good checks and balances. There are some vendors. Athena is a great example of a vendor that has really led the market in developing rules. So it will know at the point of registration if you're missing a digit. It will fire back to the payer to say, is this the right Jeff? Does he have this insurance? Is he eligible for this procedure? Fires right back within seconds to the practice that says, yes, it is. In fact, I was at a practice the other day that had Athena. And literally before I got to my car, I received a text message. They had already reconciled what my part of the balance was going to be. And I could hit 1 to pay or 2 to ignore. But if I hit 1 to pay, they were offering me a 10% discount right then and there. I had a credit card on file for them. They didn't incur the expense of sending me a statement. And I paid over text message. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing.
And they didn't have to wait the gap period.
I literally was walking out of their office and I got the message that this is your portion of the visit.
I had a similar encounter like that, and the group was on Athena as well. And I got the same thing. They got their money. So that was good. And I was fine with it.
And I don't know that's an example of AI, but that is definitely a great example of using data at the right time, at the right place, in the moment, which is really when you look at what drives up a lot of our healthcare operational costs, is sometimes doctors just don't have all the information they need. Right. Had they not done what they did to me, they would have incurred probably 20% of the cost with statements, somebody has stuffed the envelope, the material costs and all that. Plus, it would have taken my time. Then I would have mailed it back and someone would have had to take it to the bank, deposit it, then physically sit down and key that. And that's just one person. Talk about doing that over, the thousands of patients they see every year. So you could see where that type of technology, leveraging the data, probably saves them, 10 to 15% of the cost to recover that patient due balance.
And to your point, the rules driving that are a key differentiator, right. Which kind of does get back to a little bit of that AI.
It does. Yeah.
Going, Andy, to your question, I agree. I think, data is critical. And two things that pop up to me anytime we start talking about data is the security question, and I guess kind of go hand in hand, the privacy question. Because on the privacy side, and we've talked about this, actually, we just have another podcast talking specifically about cybersecurity. But, when we think about privacy when it comes to data, we've heard all the stories. It seems like there's a new story, at least for a while there, it was like every week about, health record, somebody's laptop got stolen, somebody's patient files were released or potentially released and exposed. So I think the privacy piece is going to obviously be critical when we get to AI. We've heard just recently news stories, about that Alexa and Siri are like listening in on some of our private conversations, and that information is being banked somewhere in some database or whatever. I guess I'm kind of throwing it out there. I don't know that there's a specific answer to this question, but privacy when it comes to AI, where are we at?
Yeah. At the very basic level, there is an expectation, legal expectation, that every covered entity must perform a security risk assessment and a security risk analysis, which is pretty evolved in terms of making sure that you're doing everything you can. Having said that, I always tell clients that the hackers and the dark web and all those that want to commit cyber crimes, they're always seemingly 1, 2, 3 steps ahead of the technology vendors that are out there. The second thing that is impossible to guard against is just your employees that just get tricked. There's something called social engineering, which is almost impossible to guard against. The only way you can really guard against is you have to just be obsessive with your education and awareness to your staff. And the way social engineering works is a hacker will oftentimes target an individual on a personal level. They will learn your hobbies, your likes, or interests. So let's say you like boating, and they know that because they're watching your Facebook feed. Well, wouldn't surprise me if they sent you a flyer to attend a boating event that happens to be the exact same boat that you have. What are the odds you're going to click on that? Because they may even make a profile of someone who you know that you would trust, and you click on it. And so there was an article the other day. In fact, we probably should knock this off in our company. A lot of us use the out of office reply when you're out of the office. You send an email.
Right.
Well, if I know Mark's out of the office, I'm a hacker, and I get that, then I may actually craft an email to the CFO saying, hey, I'm out of the office today using a knocked off profile Mark or a fake email account, and he is out of the office. How do I know that? Well, I got a out of office reply. So some of the security experts are saying, you shouldn't do that, because that's then allows people to social engineer you or people in your circle. And once you get social engineered, it's not a hack. Sometimes people just give up their credentials. And so they just log in. There's not some, Russian in a basement and another, that's doing computer code cracking. It's not like you see in the movies. It really, most of the time, is just an individual giving up their credentials, or worse. And this is really the scary part. It's an insider that is gone dark or gone rogue, or an insider who has been taken advantage of by somebody they don't even know they're being taken advantage of. So that's typically where most of the privacy risks sit at today.
Which goes back to your earlier point, even when you tie it back to AI, the bias that's formed. It may not be flat out cyber crime. It's just the bias that maybe it starts somewhere and kind of starts to snowball, or it's just gradually developed through these continuous, almost infinite iterations in the data.
And there is actually some really good technology evolving now that can monitor all the things that I was talking about, the insider threats. Like, for example, you could run surveillance on our network, and over time, the artificial intelligence will know certain individuals never respond to emails on the weekend. And we know who they are, right? Mm-hmm. And if there was an email that came from that individual on a weekend, the artificial intelligence would flag that and say, hey, this is suspicious because it's not normal behavior. Mm-hmm. Or what about all of a sudden at 3 a.m., some files from our server start getting downloaded? That kind of AI can be watching and monitoring that and then triggering alerts. In fact, the hack that we got involved with, it was a ransomware. It was a phishing campaign. But the reason why the CFO was suspected was because he got the email from their accounting department, but it was from an individual who rarely sends emails when they're on vacation. He just said, that just seems weird and odd. And that's what triggered, we should look into that. Sure enough, there was 30 employees who were caught up in the phishing campaign. And here's the scary part. And this is why, if you are listening and you have an incident, you want to have a culture in your organization that does not make your employees fear that they're going to get in trouble if they did an honest mistake. We knew 30 employees clicked on that email, but when the email went out and said who all clicked on that, only 5 people came forward. The other 25 were terrified that they were going to get in trouble. And I won't mention the client's name, but I can tell you the IT department had a culture of getting people in trouble when they didn't do something right. So that's just a kind of a lesson learned there, and an example of where the AI would have flagged that a lot sooner before the other 30 people click on it, or 29 people click on it.
What we're saying is there's concern related to the data security and privacy, but there's hope that it is,
I'm told that a medical record in the dark market, on the dark web, is worth anywhere between, on the low end of $25 per record, can go as high as $300 per record. So it's a huge, and what will surprise you even more, the people committing these crimes, most of them they go to your church. I mean, they're a white collar. They're just doing it either as a hobby or a full-time job. It's a good business. I mean, it's not the creepy guy that you see in the movie that you think is doing this. It could just literally be anyone that has access to a computer and just spends time just hammering away at people on these phishing campaigns. And statistically speaking, you do it enough times, you'll eventually find someone who will fall for the tactics.
Sure. Well, as we're thinking about kind of bringing it full circle, as I mentioned before, I wanted to try to we have to talk kind of big picture and define what digital transformation is and dig into AI. But I also want to be able to make it practical for people, for our clients, for healthcare executives that are out there. So maybe talk about that. And, if we're talking about how do we make digital transformation relevant, applicable for your organization, where do we start?
Well, I think organizations would need to start with strategy, whether it's engaging an expert, that can help them understand what a digital strategy means, or to take a look internally and think through the processes that, may be ripe for transformation or maybe ripe to evolve with the help of technology. So I think it's an intentional effort.
Right.
It's not necessarily just a CEO, clicking on an article and learning about a new, Alexa skill that was developed, and then they just bring someone in to implement it. It's more, bring the whole executive team together and actually talk through, okay, what are we going to try to do in terms of our digital strategy? How are we going to get there? And making a concerted action plan towards that. Would you say that's accurate?
I would. And in fact, we actually have a white paper that lays out a roadmap for evolving into digital transformation. Specifically, it focuses largely on AI, telemedicine, and the things that go beyond EHR. I don't have it in front of me, but just based on what I recall, one of the key fundamentals is to first examine what does your data environment look like today? What is your ecosystem? How much interoperability are you going to need? I strongly discourage people from going out and just buying another platform because you may regret that after you do your analysis of what you have. You may find that the limitations are you, not the technology. So that's another challenge that you have to face. If you're a leader who wants to go charge forward and get your organization on board, these decisions oftentimes are expensive. So we sometimes call these career defining decisions. We've been doing this for years now, and we'll offer it up here again. I try to mention this on every podcast, but at absolutely no charge to anyone, we will review a vendor contract to make sure that you're properly protected. Everything from the payment terms to the intellectual property to the cybersecurity. A lot of these vendors are going to rely on your data. Are they a covered entity? Are they protecting your data? What happens if they make an honest mistake with your data? So, I don't think this is something where most hospitals, unless you're just a major health system, will be developing their own platforms. They tried that with EHRs, and I think those that did regretted it. But I think this is going to require a partnership with an AI vendor or some vendor that has the skill sets. And the reason why I say that is that it's very expensive to put these types of engineers on your payroll. So, and also I think you're going to want the broader innovation versus just being in your own silo.
And I think it goes back to the fact of it's not so much that the technology itself is the innovative piece, it's what it's doing with your data. So I think obviously what you as an organization are bringing to that is the data, you getting the tool that helps do something with it, or whatever that may be.
Well, and unless you're a university or academic medical center, I also think you need to make a business case for it too, right? Right. So it's it has to be, and I would recommend start small. I mean, take that LexisNexis example that I gave. I mean, who would not want to? That's easy. I mean, that's it's almost there's no downside to that at all, and it's an immediate return. Use that win to then take on the next, maybe more advanced project. So you could start small and get some easy wins.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because when I hear something like a buzzword, whether it's AI or digital transformation, whatever, when I hear that thrown out, I immediately start thinking, if I were in the position of C-level executive at a health system, let's say, and someone came and said, we're going to embark on digital transformation, I would think like, that to me sounds like we're going to embark on curing cancer.
Right.
And that to me is one of the, and I know Jeffrey, you use this phrase a lot, but that's like a boil the ocean type approach, like we're going to tackle the biggest, thing possible. But to me, I guess what we're saying, when I've heard, what I've seen that's out there, is it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It can be, take on the things, the low hanging fruit.
Right.
there was an article just, I guess, last year, I think it was, from Harvard Business Review, or it's called AI for the Real World. They studied 152 projects related to artificial intelligence. And among those, they found the ones that were the most successful were the ones that tackled the low-hanging fruit. One of the examples they gave, you mentioned curing cancer, was related to MD Anderson. And back in 2013, they partnered with IBM Watson to try to diagnose and recommend treatment plans for specific cancers, which sounds incredible.
Sure.
But, the project was a boil the ocean, I think, kind of situation where they did it for several years, spent $60 million or so, and they hadn't even tested it on a patient, by 2017. But continuing to work with cognitive technology, they found that doing smaller things for patients using AI, was better, making a hotel or a restaurant recommendation for families that come to visit patients, or identifying patients that need help with bills, or something of that nature that's a part of that kind of care delivery process, but not necessarily transforming the entire thing. I think that's where taking this performance improvement based approach to digital transformation can really help, where it's plan, do, check, act. You do several of those cycles. It's a stair step. You're going up and up and up towards your goal of your digital strategy, where it's not just one thing is going to make it happen. And then I think multidisciplinary teams would be probably very important in that effort, where you're involving the physicians and the people that are actually, inputting the data or with the patient, to give input and drive some of that.
Yeah. And actually, I think we could even put digital transformation into two work streams. One would be the clinical aspect, the treating of patients, the curing the cancer, the genetics type stuff. And then the operational side, which is more the business side. How do we leverage it to lower our costs, maybe increase our patient experience, improve those kind of things, improve our operations and whatnot. I think the breakthrough for the clinical side is going to be as they start pairing up all the genetic testing that's being done, which there's some fascinating, we can have a whole conversation around that and the pros and cons of it. But that MD Anderson project that you were describing, one thing that I read that did come out of that is they can now tell which patients will be most responsive to certain types of treatments based on all that data. And if you've ever witnessed someone go through cancer, it's a lot of times crapshoot. It may or may not work. And so if you can determine that your odds are greater based on the data, then that's a huge leap forward than what we were going through in the past, where we just tried everything and we hoped for the best. And if you put somebody through a chemotherapy regimen and odds are it's not going to work, you should have probably not have done that, both in terms of cost as well as putting the patient through it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great example. And the MD Anderson is a perfect example in my mind of the treating cancer. To your point, Jeffrey, that process of that is not a black and white, right, wrong answer. I mean, oncologists will tell you this is every case is different, and we treat this as a process, and there's an evolutionary element to it. But what are some of the predictors? What are some of the indicators? What are some of the things? And then just the additive things, like you said, just sometimes just relieving some of the pressure off the family can actually tie back to the clinical experience. Right. Maybe not the outcome necessarily in a cancer case, but certainly as far as just the experience itself. And that makes a big difference.
Well, and I think really the takeaway here is just start small and start on the easy, basic stuff. There's a lot of, I think, real simple things. And there's some really cool stuff that I saw where apparently states spend millions of dollars on ambulance drivers to pick up people. And 70 to 80% of the time, it's not an emergency. It's just somebody needing a ride to the emergency room. But they take an ambulance nonetheless, very expensive. And so they're toying with the idea of just shooting an Uber driver over there to pick them up. Someone who's maybe trained as a medic, not a real Uber driver, but some type of concept,
kind of an Uber version
of ambulance
medical
driving.
transportation.
So, little things like that where the technology exists today that we could leverage ride sharing to save millions of dollars. So easy things that you can start looking into.
And then I think the other big takeaway finally is just like what we found, whether it was EHR implementation or implementing a new rev cycle system, rarely is the technological implementation piece the hardest component. I believe the hardest piece, the longest lasting element there is the change management.
Adoption.
Exactly. And the actual integration into the culture, into the operations, the training, all of those things. And so it's going to be no different when it comes to whether it's telemedicine, whether it's AI, whether it's whatever the next thing is. Without that piece, the technology is just going to essentially just sit there.
Right. Yeah. And I think the best way you get adoption or you change the culture is again, you go back to starting small, getting some early wins to convince people. And we saw this with EHRs. I mean, it was highly resistant in the early days for good reasons because they were poorly designed. But what did the government do? They put some incentives, right? So if you didn't adopt, you got penalized and you got your reimbursement reduced. And then you even get fines in some cases. So they found a way to encourage people through incentives. I don't know of any right now on the digital transformation other than you would want to follow what standards are there now for your basic meaningful use, MIPS, MACRA, all those things whatever incentives come for digital transformation will be based off that as our foundation.
Well, I think one example could be, again, going back to the telemedicine piece, is the updates in the coding requirements for remote encounters. And I think something like that is almost a low hanging fruit for many organizations.
So like, for example, there's two real barriers. One, what you just said, the payers were reluctant and slow to reimburse it. But now the payers, surprisingly, you think telemedicine, I would assume doctors were buying it. It's actually insurance companies who's buying telemedicine services, and they're contracting with, in some cases, nurse practitioners. So our own insurance for our company, I did an MD Live visit. They encouraged me. They said, hey, try the app. They pushed it to me. I downloaded it. I literally had a visit on the sitting on my couch. I never left the house, and they called my prescription in. So it was a beautiful thing. The second barrier has been there's just these quirky rules that every state, so doctors don't want to deal with the compliance. Like, for example, you actually have to have a face-to-face visit at some point in the relationship with that patient. Well, now they're getting rid of that rule because the payers realize maybe they don't need to go in, especially if it's a bug bite or something simple. Why add that extra burden? And I think if the more they lower the burden, the more they start reimbursing it, then we'll see the doctors get on board with
Absolutely. I agree.
Especially if they have to reimburse less. If it's cheaper to deliver, And
doctors really should not be concerned that this is taking business away. In fact, remember the freak out over retail clinics and these, minute clinics. I mean, the doctors freaked out about that. And in fact, the AMA tried to stop it, and it turned out it didn't. In fact, the doctors who embraced it now use these organizations as referral sources. There are many practices that don't have doctors at full capacity that might want to make extra income just taking a random telemedicine visit. It's pretty seamless for both the caregiver and the patient. And I'm seeing reimbursement go anywhere on the low end of $50 to $125. And if you think about that, in most cases, you're paid before the doctor comes on board. I don't know. Most doctors don't get paid $50, $60 for a basic 9921213 office visit after the copay and everything comes out. So it's really not a reduction in income. If anything, it could actually increase that doctor's capacity to see more patients in a way that might even be a little bit easier for both the caregiver and the patient.
Absolutely. Well, this has been extremely, I think, enlightening and informative discussion. And so I know, Jeffrey, you referenced the white paper we have on AI. We'll make sure there's a link available to that in the notes for this podcast. And we'll be doing more in terms of our work, continue to do more in this realm. We'll definitely be talking about it more. So I guess everyone can stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, thanks for coming on, and we'll look forward to future discussions.
Appreciate it. Thank you.